Hello, and welcome to my analysis of what magical girls can beat Gojo. For this list, I'll be considering magical girls and pseudo-magical girls, and won't factor in witches for the most part unless they're also part magical girl. I may also consider doppels if they're relevant. Stronger forms will also be considered as long as the base is a magical girl. So no witch forms, but we can allow things like fusion and such. So first we're going to consider verse equalization and how the characters would even interact here, as these verses are surprisingly similar in a lot of ways, as you will soon find out. First off, let's talk their main sources of power in their system, that being magic and cursed energy. Simply put, they're both formed from very similar aspects, that being emotion. While magic is based on the fluctuation of emotion, cursed energy is based on negative emotion. Seeing how cursed energy and magic come from very similar sources, they have a lot of crossover. Both can be used to enhance the body to superhuman levels, both can enhance weapons, both grant the user extrasensory perception, both can heal injuries, and both can be blasted out in the form of energy. Where it becomes interesting is their unique aspects. Magical girls are able to survive any form of physical damage due to having their soul separated from their body. This wouldn't mean they don't have cursed energy, as their body would still technically have magic in it to help it function, but their body is effectively a corpse, and that means that it wouldn't possess an innate domain, as its soul is instead within its soul gem, which grants disadvantages and advantages to magical girls over JJK sorcerers, as they don't have to worry about injury as much as JJK sorcerers. But at the same time, certain JJK sorcerers would be able to just manifest things inside of them, though they could likely react to this. This allows them to survive soul damage that would usually be unhealable and heal from it because they do not have a soul in their bodies. Though they don't gain the full benefit of not having cursed energy, as they are still affected by things like domain expansion and all that because their soul gems are still, souls. Magical girls have slightly better healing factors than jujutsu sorcerers because they can heal their full heads and generally survive any sort of lethal damage, while jujutsu sorcerers can't. But their healing is slow and costs a lot of magic, unless they have a specific ability that allows their healing to be faster. Another thing I'd like to talk about is barrier techniques and witches' barriers. So I'll be comparing witches' barriers and labyrinths to barrier techniques and innate domain a lot in this, so I really quickly want to say why I made this comparison. To put it simply, they're pretty similar. Innate domains and the inside of a witch's barrier are both shaped by similar ideas. Both are metaphysical embodiments of one's mental environment and can affect reality in different ways. Being bigger on the inside, warping reality, causing certain effects on people, mental or physical, etc. Innate domains and cursed techniques are similar in aspect to a magical girl's innate magic. Though one is formed at birth and the other is formed at the point of a contract with Kyubey. The main difference between the two is that cursed techniques are based more on your mental state as a whole, while magical girl abilities are based more on their wishes. But we also see witches' labyrinths are similar in aspect to innate domains, where they are formed around the magical girl's mental state as a pocket dimension. We get further context into how barriers kind of work in Madoka by seeing how Alina Gray manipulates barriers, and seeing how barriers contain within them a labyrinth, which is similar to an innate domain. We can say that a barrier containing an innate domain, which is basically a domain expansion, and a barrier containing a witch's labyrinth, which is similar to an innate domain, are similar enough to be compared. So yeah, witch's barrier is comparable enough to a domain expansion. Why is this important? Well, it is pretty important for how certain magical girls will counteract some of Gojo's techniques. But how each magical girl does this specifically is more dependent on them as individuals. And not every magical girl can just create a witch's barrier or control witch's barriers. They can enter witches' barriers and even exit witches' barriers, which means they could likely enter and exit a domain without like having to break through. But that doesn't exactly help against Unlimited Void unless they can resist the technique outright. Now we'll go over specific abilities to Gojo. First off is Curse Technique, which is limitless. This technique brings the concept of infinity to reality, allowing for a variety of abilities. First off is Infinity, which infinitely slows down anything approaching Gojo, creating an almost perfect defense. Next is Lapse Blue and Reversal Red, which are basically projectiles that can implode and explode things by pushing or pulling space. Next is Purple, which by fusing red and blue creates a imaginary mass that can pretty much destroy anything. He can also use Limitless to teleport, can expand Limitless to crush things, and he can trap a foe inside Limitless with Domain Expansion, Unlimited Void, which allows him to flood a person with infinite information, rendering them immobile. He also has 6 eyes, which allows him to control cursed energy precisely at the atomic level, which allows him to be very efficient with his cursed energy. It also allows him to see cursed techniques and determine their nature. He's also no slouch when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, and is generally a master martial artist. He can also do just about anything a normal sorcerer can, like Black Flash, which amplifies his power by 2.5 if he hits it. Now, Infinity may seem like a perfect protection, but even in universe it's been bypassed plenty of times, mostly by either cursed tools that cancel out cursed techniques, or by domain amplification, which envelops a person in their domain, preventing them from using their cursed technique, but allowing them to bypass any other curse technique. Also, if there isn't a projectile or anything physical for Infinity to slow down, Gojo will be hit by it. Also, if you're moving fast enough, you can bypass Infinity. You'd have to be moving infinitely fast to do so, though. Now let's talk power for both sides. My main scaling for Puella Magi's place them roughly even with Gojo in terms of raw power, unless they're notably weak like Homura. If you want my exact scaling, I'd say low-level magical girls around town level, mid-level magical girls around city level, and high-level magical girls are around mountain level or higher. In terms of speed, unless they are particularly slow, I see most magical girls as the same speed as Gojo as well, being massively hypersonic to relativistic. And as I've kind of alluded to here, I scale Gojo to around city level, massively hypersonic to relativistic. With all of that out of the way, we can get into the magical girls that can beat Gojo. So let's start with honorable mentions. First, let's talk the Holy Quintet, and not a lot of them stand a chance. We get into a very common issue here, which is which one of these guys can bypass Infinity at all. And simply put, 4 of the main 5 cannot. Or maybe 3 of the main 5. Or 2. Let's first get into Homura, who's the one who can most consistently do this. Homura's ability is to stop and reverse time. In time stop, she can do anything she wants until she touches someone, which lets them into time stop. This gives Homura 1 chance of landing a solid hit on Gojo before he is led into time stop. But seeing how she is one of the weaker magical girls, it's likely she wouldn't be able to one-shot him and would get killed right after she hits him. A likely scenario would be that Homura pulls out the golf club, smacks Gojo in the face, Gojo gets led into time stop, Gojo grabs the golf club, and punches her in the face a few times. Next up is Kyoko, who in her base form has nothing to bypass Infinity, but has her Doppel Fusion form, which allows her to fuse with a Doppel and gain its abilities. In Doppel Fusion, she is also massively stronger, so it's possible she could create a Witch's Barrier and potentially use that to activate an effect similar to Domain Amplification, which is something that can bypass Gojo's Infinity, but that's a massive if, and we don't really know if she has control over barriers like that. Next is Madoka, who in base doesn't really do anything that can get past Infinity, but has a stronger form that I'll talk about later when I talk about who can stomp Gojo. Next is a class of magical girls I'll be considering mind manipulators. Now, Gojo hasn't shown any explicit resistance to mind manipulation on the level that these magical girls can do it at, but he still does restore his brain with RCT and all that, so it's likely he could resist it. And either way, they aren't shutting down Infinity using this, probably. Next up is Nimu, who can summon a lot of things with her ability, including things that could potentially bypass Infinity or harm Gojo. But it costs her life force, so it's unlikely she'd be able to stand a chance against Gojo, especially because she's pretty weak. Still, given the amount of Uwasa she can summon, it's impressive enough to place her at least in this tier. Then we have Burnell, who can create barriers. We don't really know if her barriers are anything similar to simple domain even, let alone domain amplification and all that, though. Thus, this is pretty iffy, and we can't really consider it as a definite win con. Next, we have Isabel, or Isabeau, or however you pronounce it. With her sheer amount of abilities, you'd expect at least one to bypass Infinity, but nope. The one thing that could throw Gojo for a loop, her immunity to damage, is only applicable if you're a magical girl, so Gojo's fine. Even though she is way, way stronger than anything Gojo could do. Now we get into the actually debatable ones. Characters I think actually stand a good chance against Gojo and could potentially even beat him. We get into the ones with a solid chance, also known as a 40-60 to 70-30 win rate. First we get into Lopin, who can survive witchification and immediately transform back into her magical girl form. So this basically makes her witch form part of her magical girl form, and along with Doppel, she should be able to get anything she wants from her witch form, which means she gets her unique ability from her witch form, which is the ability to cancel out a magical girl's magic if they look at her eyes. Given how similar magic and cursed energy are, she could potentially cancel out Gojo's cursed technique for a little bit. Though, the second he looks away from the eyes, he should be fine to just activate it again. So, he stands a pretty solid chance against her. If he quickly figures out Lopin's ability, it just doesn't look in their eyes, and beats the ever-loving crap out of her, he should be fine. Next up is Rina Minami. If we assume transformation works with Gojo's abilities, she's basically able to copy Gojo's abilities and just take Infinity for herself, along with all of his techniques. But she'd lack a lot of Gojo's experience, which means she'd probably get pieced up. Still, she has a better chance than most of the honorable mentions, so she gets put up here. Next up is Hana, who is a similar case to Rina, where if we consider magic and cursed techniques similar enough, she could likely copy Gojo's Infinity, though she'd have to deal with Gojo's other techniques as well, which fares a little worse for her. Next is Kaede Ikino, who, assuming Infinity counts as an obstacle, her temporary deletion power should work against it, and it will allow her to get past Infinity. She also has a decently strong Doppel, though it wouldn't really affect Gojo too much without her deleting Infinity first. Next is Corview, who, if she gets off La Danse Macabre, it's over for Gojo, as he cannot RCT it, as it applies Curse, which prevents all healing, and the effects of La Danse Macabre doesn't seem to require contact, so it's likely she could just use it. So she likely just kills him with Advanced Bubonic Plague if she gets it off. Next up is Alina Gray. Remember her? She's pretty important. With her ability to create and manipulate barriers somewhat similar to JJK barriers, she'd likely be able to create an effect similar to domain amplification, and if she figures that out, she stands a decent chance against Gojo through canceling out domain expansion and Infinity, and generally just being pretty strong in her own right. But to say she outright wins 100% of the time would require her higher forms, which we will talk about later. Finally is the leader of Promised Blood herself, Yuna Korea. Probably the most solid chance of beating Gojo out of any magical girl in this tier, with the most consistent ability to counteract Gojo's shenanigans. Yuna's target redirection allows her to bypass Infinity by just targeting Gojo directly, and would bypass Unlimited Void similar to how it affected Felicia's Oblivion magic, where she could redirect the target of domain back on Gojo. Gojo may be resistant to the effects of his own domain, but this still wouldn't prevent Yuna from choosing him as a target for the domain. It just wouldn't affect him. Next, we have the Kills Gojo tier. This is the tier that kills Gojo. Basically, everything in this tier has a very, very solid chance of winning against Gojo, either 80-30 or above. It is almost difficult for these characters to lose against Gojo. So first we have Final Tart, the final form of Tart. This form is stated to have infinite power. Simply put, infinite power cracks infinity because infinity can't slow down an infinite mass or an infinite speed or infinite anything. Even if we don't consider the statement of her being infinitely powerful and her stats breaking the stat system to be infinitely powerful, we can still consider the fact that she is part witch and could likely create witch's barriers and recreate something similar to domain amplification. And with her stats being at least country level and her speed being well above most typical magical girls, she would likely stand a very, very good chance against Gojo, just through stat stomping alone. Holy Alina or Neo Dorothy Motherfucker, you make your choice. Both have the abilities of Alina, which we've already gone over, and additional strengths, plus more abilities, and just generally way too strong for Gojo. Next is Kimochi Unikuria, which is another case of a character that already had a solid chance against Gojo, getting a power that just destroys him. Even with just half the power of Eve, Yuna was able to slime entire groups of people around the level of Gojo just with her raw strength. And she still has access to target redirection to get past Infinity or bypass in Limited Void. Next we have Kimochi Levi and Infinite Iroha, who are both characters that possess the full power of the Kimochi Stones and Embryo Eve. Similar case to Tart, infinite power means Infinity can't really stop it. These forms can scale to the Mirror Witch Winchester, so it's no doubt that they could likely scale above anything that Infinity can stop. Next is Tamura Akemi, who is basically just Homura Akemi, but way stronger. So she does the same thing Homura does against Gojo, but actually does one-shot him. Kinda unfair and kinda boring, but most of this tier is. Kosane Kihira and Aruna Kihira. Light novel characters. Anyways. Ultimate Madoka and Akuma Homura. Literal concepts that can delete things from existence. Yeah, another just not fair one. Sorry, there's not much to say in these cases. It's just like, yeah, no duh. And that's the list. If I had to rank these by what characters would have the most interesting fight with Gojo, I'd say probably Korea and Elena Gray have the most chance of having an interesting, fair fight with Gojo, as everything in the kills Gojo tier kind of just kills Gojo, while Elena Gray and Korea both actually stand a solid chance against him, but aren't like absolutely destroying him. Just for impression to how many magical girls actually made it onto this list, there are over 200 magical girls in Magia Record plus the rest of the series. And of those 200 magical girls, around 18 made it to this list. So, yeah, that's like 9% of the cast. Gojo defeats a lot of them just by existing. He is definitely very, very strong. So don't let this be a, oh, this verse stomps Gojo. Let it more be, oh, hey, that's interesting that this verse can even stand a chance. And how many cool, interesting abilities it has, and how many cool and interesting characters it has. Like, don't take this too seriously, please. With that, I'm glad to say that this whole endeavor is over. Uh, if you are interested, please leave a comment, maybe subscribe, I guess. I don't know what else you'd get from this channel, but you can do that. Thank you. Bye. Let me know if you want to see a video like this for other JJK characters, or potentially characters from things like Project Moon or any other series I'm interested in. I'm more than willing to try and do this again.